Hello and welcome to Read with Pride, a podcast focused on LGBTQIA+ literature brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Ocean Pride Committee.
Hi, I'm Diane, she, her, from the Ocean County Library System, and I'm a member of the Ocean Pride Committee.
Hi, I'm Lexi. I am a member of the Ocean Pride Committee as well, and I am the Outreach Services Coordinator for the Ocean County Library, she, her.
The book we're discussing today is The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley. When a group of college friends are at the funeral of one of their roommates, they decide that after a person dies, it is too late to say how much you love them. This propels them to make a pact with each other. If during their lives, if anyone needs a living funeral, that they will come together and have one. The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley follows these friends through their lives from their 20s to their 50s, stopping at a few living funerals along the way.
These living funerals are not random acts. They have to do with life-altering situations that happen, and you can only have one. The rule for the pact is that you can only have one living funeral, and that's it. You can't call one every year. These were after big events, so some of the ones that we read about were divorce, death of your parents, being arrested for art fraud. There was a wide range of different situations that could trigger the pact.
Okay, let's get into it. Lexi, what was your overall impression of the group of friends? Why do you think they stayed connected all these years?
I think it was really interesting how this book opened up with speaking about how this group of friends, they met in college. And it was interesting in the way that when you meet your friends in college, it's extremely situational. You are kind of roped together with this group of kids who have no idea what's going on. You have no idea what's going on. And you live, eat, and breathe with these people. For a lot of them, the first time they've been away from their family and friends and that unit of support. So I think it really bonds people during that time. So I think these friends really, a lot of them didn't have anything in common. A lot of them, besides going to the college, really were from very different backgrounds and different interests and all of that. So I think that the situational friendship that they had in college is really unique because it bonded them during a really critical part of their lives. And I think that was kind of the glue that helped them stay connected because it was such an impactful time in their lives.
Yeah, I agree with that. What's interesting for me is my college life didn't take such a traditional role. Like I started traditional and then I veered off course. So I sort of have a knowledge of what that would be like. And obviously they were transfer students. So that's a different feeling. I was more of an adult student when I went to college. So my college life wasn't the same.
Yeah, and I can say I was a transfer student as well. I went to community college for 2 years and then transferred. And it's a very unique situation being a transfer student. It's a little bit, I think, of a more rocky start. It could be lonelier because you don't have those 2 years or that first year of prepping and being friends and going through like the first steps together. So it is a little bit of a bigger bonding experience, I think, because you're really lost as a transfer student.
Yeah, I think that's also what bonded them. They even said they were all transfer students and they were in dorms. So that's probably one of their bonds. And then obviously the trauma of losing their friend when they were young bonded them. And I think that helped them stay together. The trauma in both of those situations, because transferring, starting a new, fresh college could be traumatic. And of course, losing a friend.
A lot of trauma bonding going on in this book.
Yes. So did you find any similarities between you and any of these characters? And did you find a character that you related to more than others?
What we just kind of said a little bit with being like a transfer student, I definitely found that similarity. And also being in very situational friendships with people in college where we were brought together by things because outside of that specific thing, being like transfer students in college and being completely thrown into the mess. A lot of the people I was friends with, I wouldn't have been friends with outside of school. So I think it was a big similarity that I had because I had a very eclectic group of friends in college as well. I think for me, I related, I think, to Jordan the most, but to be honest, I think I had a lot of similarities within the whole group. Each character had something that I resonated with.
Yeah, I do think that's interesting because I could see different pieces of myself in the characters. Of course, these definitely are more Generation X folks, so, and that's my generation, so I can see different pieces of when one of them was looking at artwork and they were like, oh, there's no women presidents, and they're like, maybe one day. So I did resonate probably with Marilee the most because I'm a single mom, and even that goes through different changes. And as being a mom, for me anyway, that was very pivotal in my life's journey. That's probably why I saw myself more in her. But I also felt like they had much more money than I ever did, you know?
I was going to say there's a lot of privilege. Yeah.
A lot of privilege, that's the word. Yes, for sure. I was like, wow, like they definitely were a different class than I was, or status. Yeah, for sure. I definitely would see that. So what do you think? Do you think you would ever want to have a living funeral thrown for you?
Yeah, I think I would. I think it would be really fun. I'm not a birthday person, so I think that this would be kind of fun, doing a big celebration of your life, but in a, I don't know, a little bit darker, a little bit more emotional way. It seems like, I don't know, I just connect with it better. I think it would be a lot of fun. You know, I've always kind of thought and I know we're going to talk about this, I think, a little bit further down, but I don't really like the way that people wait until someone's died to come together and talk about how important that person was. There's reasons, I get that. But yeah, I think I would love to have a living funeral. I think it's fun. And I have to say, I think, because we kind of saw it in this book a little bit, I think down the line years later, it would make your actual funeral less of a somber affair. Because you know that those people, your friends, they died knowing that you loved them and how important they were. So I think you don't have that sort of leftover guilt or shame that maybe you weren't as present or they weren't as aware of your feelings. So yeah, I think personally it would be a good thing.
Yeah. Would I want a living funeral thrown for me? I think I want to just live every day to its fullest. You know, I've had people in my life that are really close to me pass away young. And so I think that has brought me to like, just live every day. So it's funny you say you're not a birthday person. I had a big one this year. I turned 50 this year, and I was very like, it was exciting, you know, like that's a big deal. And again, you go to like, it's just a number, and what's your other option? So I think it would be fun to have one thrown for me, but I also think just the same thing, to have people come together when you're alive, the waiting afterwards, and you just never know now after COVID, so many people didn't have funerals or they couldn't. So maybe, yeah, better to celebrate now than afterwards. What did you think of the non-linear timeline of the novel?
I absorb most of my books by audio. So I do some reading occasionally, but most of it is because I have a lot of things going on. I listen to audiobooks. So the book was narrated by the author, which was very interesting because you got to see exactly how he meant things to be said, and it was a good experience. Normally I like reading and listening to audiobooks by the author. I will say, though, I did not like the non-linear timeline. I wasn't a fan. It was too difficult to keep in mind what time you were in and when things were happening. I think if I was reading it and had that written down in front of me, it would be much easier to follow. But I was not a fan for audiobook. I don't think it was working for me.
I also consume most of my books in audio. I just think with life being busy, you can read so much faster, you know, and I will bump it up. I never do it on 1.0. It's usually a 2.0. And I thought the narrator, you know, Mr. Rowley works good for that, even 2.0. It wasn't too fast. The nonlinear, I didn't realize it so much until I wound up reading it a second time. And that's when I'm like, oh yeah, it was nonlinear. I think it didn't really bother me, but I do agree. If I'm physically reading something and I get to a point, if I'm on a nonlinear, I might flip back. Whereas in audio, I'm not going backwards to see what happened. I'm just, keep on going forward. So I do think he tried to put some pop culture references in to maybe be like, oh, that was from that year. But if you didn't grow up during those years, maybe you wouldn't catch those as well. So that's interesting you say that it was more troublesome to you. There is a point in the book where Marilee asks Naomi, as they approach their graduation, now they were 22 at the time, it says, she said, like, do you feel grown? And I think that's interesting. I wanted to ask you, Lexi, like, do you feel grown? And at what point did you feel like an adult?
I think it was really interesting. So I'm in my 30s. I am an elder millennial, as they say. It was interesting thinking because this book, most of it happens when the crew are in their late 40s and turning 50. So for me, I think, do you feel grown is an interesting question. Personally, I think it's really fluid for me. I don't think it's something where, I hit a certain age and I was like, well, I'm good. I'm done. I'm grown. I'm an adult. I'm perfect for the rest of my life to be this mature, knowledgeable adult. I think for me, there's been pieces of my life where I've felt grown and very adult. And there's also a lot of time where I still kind of revel in being a little bit, I guess, younger, if that makes sense. But I also think, you can tell me your opinion on this too. I don't know if the majority of people ever really feel grown. Like, I don't know if that's something people experience. I've graduated school and I have my own home and all of that stuff. And I felt grown, I guess, doing that. But sometimes I'm still like, wait a second, I forgot to do this very simple thing. So I don't know that anybody truly feels grown once they reach a certain point, and then forever after, they're like, oh yes, I'm an adult. But I'd be interested to kind of hear more of what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I agree. Part of me is like, if they asked it when they were 22, when they were graduating, and maybe you do, like there's pivotal points in your life, you're like, oh, I've done it, I've accomplished this. But I think, like when I read that, I'm like, more important to me is to still grow, to keep growing. Yeah. Because again, it took me a long time. I was 47 or 48 when I got my degree, so it took me a long time to get my bachelor's and then my master's, and I was still growing. And then afterwards, I did have that little bit of like, oh, now what? And it's like, oh, well, now this. And I still make mistakes every day. Every day I'm like trying to learn more and trying to grow more. And I think that as a Gen X, that's what I would want to show my children, who are, what are they then? I guess they're not millennials, they're younger than millennials. Gen Z, yes. Yeah. I would like to show them, like, just keep going forward, keep growing forward in your life. So yeah, I don't think there's ever a point where I hope to never be like, I'm done, Yeah. But that brings us to the next question we have is Marilee's daughter, who I guess she might have been a millennial, but no, I think she was probably Gen Z, I would think. She says to Craig at one point, she says, I try to be an optimist. It's harder for my generation. And Craig replies, I think every generation feels that way. So then I'm wondering, like, do you agree with Craig? I think since we were just like the generation thing, I do think that every generation does feel like we've gone through something. When I think of my generation, Generation X, I think our challenges weren't the same as millennials and Gen Z. I do have a more optimistic look on life. And I don't know if that's just the way I was raised or the generation I was raised in, or if it's me. I'm not really sure. I could look at the past generation and say, oh, I wish they had done this. But I don't know. I think the generation thing is important in this book also, because it leaned more towards Gen X. So maybe you can even talk a little bit about that, Lexi.
Yeah, sure. And I think the math was a little bit confusing because of the nonlinear timeline.
Yes.
But I believe that Mia, when all is said and done, is a millennial.
Right.
I think she would still be in that group. She'd either be a young millennial, I think, or an older Gen Zer, but I think she was a young millennial.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting because I will say, and I might just be very bleak, I'm not sure, but I would say I don't think millennials have any optimism. I think we've lived through so many historic, pivotal moments that have not been good, have not been positive. We've lived through so much in the earlier parts of our life. There has been so many major historical world events in our critical period that I think it's extremely difficult to kind of look forward to certain things. And I know like millennial has kind of been like a hot button title for forever at this point. But when you look at it, it's interesting because like millennials really have gone through a bunch of major world events. When we were growing up, there was 9/11, there was the 2008 recession. I mean, there's a lot of things that have been lived through that we just don't have. I was reading an interesting article that was talking about how millennials are not on the same timeline for milestones that every previous generation has had. So millennials are getting married much later. They're having kids later. If they're buying houses at all, it's later. And I think that it's really interesting because our timeline has been disrupted by a lot of these major historical events. And I think there's kind of a bad rap for some millennials who lived at home or still do into their late 20s or older. They're not buying houses, all of that stuff. So I think it's interesting generationally, because while I was reading this book, I do think that it was very Gen X focused, and it was interesting to kind of see the difference between the two generations and just my way of thinking and reading how the characters were thinking.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you about the math. It's hard for me because they say Marilee was the only one that wasn't 50. So I would think her child might be younger, but maybe that's just book math.
So Marielle is 49. She's the last one to turn 50. So her daughter at one point, I want to say, I think she's like 28 at the end. Because remember, Marielle had her in college. She had her at 22. So when Marielle's 49 turning, I would assume Mia was around 28. And this was a few years ago at this point.
Right.
So that's what I'm thinking. If my math is correct, and we're thinking about this book is contemporary for when he's writing it, I think that Mia is, a millennial.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I think also a lot of times when I read a book, I put myself in the book. So like, of course, I'm thinking, oh, that must be my child's age because Mia graduated college and, so let's go on. So because these characters lost a dear friend in a period of major life change and life decisions, their futures were forever impacted. For example, the Jordans decided they needed to be together right away instead of forging their own paths first. Discuss how losing loved ones can impact you differently in different phases of life.
This is a great question because I think it majorly impacts how you react and feel and move on depending on what life path you're on and like what period of time it happens during your life. I can say that if I lost someone very close to me when I was 22 and my life was changing, I was in college, I was deciding to go to grad school, this and that, I would have reacted completely different than if I lost someone now, or even if I lost someone when I was 50. I think it's very impactful because it's similar, I think, to when, like, let's say you're dating someone and they're your college sweetheart and you got married at 22. You're still developing who you are. And I think that it's going to be a very different foundation and a very different background and feel than if you waited until you were like 35 and got married. It's a very different mindset. So I think losing someone, which would be, I guess, the opposite end of things, would feel very different and kind of earth-shattering in a way that you're losing your innocence if you were 22. because you don't expect you or your friends to die that young. You're not thinking about how things are going to end or change. You're just beginning your life. You're just getting out of college. You're becoming an adult. So I think it would be very different. And you can see that in the book, how it really changed the trajectory of all their lives, which I think is why it's still a big part of their lives all these years later, if they lose somebody much later.
Yeah, I think similar. Anytime, any period you are in life, it's whatever's going on in your life at that time is going to impact how that loss affects you. I think that my biggest losses weren't until I was in my 40s. Like I had loss, but I think my first real big loss was when I was 41. So it impacted me greatly, and it made me take a look, because the person was very young. They were 44, and it was shocking and sudden. But then some other people that I know that lost someone very young, like they have a whole different view on death and life and living. Or if when my father passed away, I might have a different view, because I think, well, he's my father. He was supposed to pass away. The plan, hopefully, is that our parents pass away before us. Doesn't always happen like that, you know, and
Right.
sadly. So, yeah, I think that losing loved ones impact you differently. And I think when you have that first loss, really gut-wrench, and then you sort of build up your, I'm not saying grief is less than the next one, but you sort of build on the grief, or it does lessen it because you are more used to it.
You have a frame of reference, to use a library analogy.
Yes.
You have a frame of reference for what that loss could feel and look like, kind of. You know, every loss is going to be different, but it's not going to be, I think, I don't know. I you know, as I guess first feeling as that big first loss.
Yeah. And I think when I lose someone now, or if I read someone or hear that someone passed away, I think, well, they weren't just 50, they weren't 44, they weren't 50. You know, like loss is hard no matter the age, no matter. Right. But I always have that thing of like, oh, but this person was this age, you know. So yeah, I think that happens. In an interview, author Stephen Rowley said, each character is kind of a casserole of different people that I know. Did you see characteristics of people that you know in any of these characters?
Definitely. I thought that was a really interesting way to put that too, because I definitely get the people casserole vibe. Yeah, I did. In college especially, had a very large group of LGBTQIA plus friends. It was very much a part of my life. So I think that there were a lot of people that I was reading about that I said, oh, that's this person or that's this person. So yeah, I definitely saw a lot of similarities and characteristics. You know, I think, like we kind of said earlier, where college is such a interesting situational friendship time period, that sometimes all you have in common is very surface level things, like you go to the same school, you're part of the same club, you're in the same class. So I did see a lot of the blend of different people as well, where like sometimes I was just friends with someone because they were in the same club as me or whatever. And then I think the drifting as you get older, because a lot of times you don't stay best friends in everyday contact with people you went to college with. A lot of times, even if they're extremely meaningful and monumental to you, it lessens, you know, after the years. And this group of friends, the book starts when they're 22, well, a good portion of it, and kind of ends when they're around 50. So like they've had all of that time. And I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I remember in the book, there were large periods of time where they didn't really speak at all throughout the years. So yeah, I think it was interesting. I have that too. I've been out of undergrad now for quite a while, and well over a decade at this point. And or is that, God, I can't even do math. It feels like a long time. But yeah, so I found that very realistic, where you have in the back of your mind that people were really important to you, and you might not talk to them every couple months. You might not even talk to them in a year, but they're still there and important.
Yeah, I agree with you that definitely in the book, they had large gaps that they didn't talk, and the pact did keep them together. That was something we didn't say, that the pact is what sort of brought them back together. It was like, oh, we got to come together for whoever. I think that definitely, I like that, the casserole of different people. Yeah, each person is their own, they've got their own things going on. You can look at coworkers or friends or family, and you could definitely, I was able to see similarities to a lot of people. One thing that I feel, since we were talking about generations, millennials did better than Gen X. Gen Xer, I feel like we're very whatever, kind of chill. But when we talk about an LGBTQIA plus character or people, we weren't as good at, I think we were great at being accepting, but I don't think we were as good as be who you are and show it and show it, we were be who you are, but whatever, definitely better than boomers, but we're definitely going the right way. And I think my children are better for it, but I would like to feel the world is going in a better way.
I agree. Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I do think that, and this is a common thing, every generation as they go becomes a little bit more open or a little bit more aware, maybe not accepting, I would hope accepting, but more aware of differences with people. And now we have names for things. We have definitions for identities more than we ever have before. And while reading this, I was just thinking back, because the book starts in the 90s. It's not like it was a million years ago. And just talking about the AIDS crisis and how impactful that was during that time, where it was not okay to it was okay to be gay or queer, but not really as openly, I think it definitely spoke to the attitude that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about that because I grew up as a queer kid and was in school in the early 2000s, the 90s, but really the early 2000s. And it was a very different landscape. It was very different, I think back then it was a little bit more open to be queer, but still not accepted, I would say. And now reading this book and also looking about where we are now in 2024 and how it's such a different world, School it's a place where you can show up in your identity and your authenticity more, on one hand. On other hand, it's also, I think, not to get too much into this, but it can be more of a target as well. There is definitely a divide with identities.
Yeah. I think just what you said, I feel it's we're better, and I don't think we're worse. I think we're moving towards better. That could be my Gen X. That could be my Gen X saying that. But I think when I look at the Jordans, I was oh yeah, I can picture typical gay men that I knew. I always loved gay men, but they weren't allowed to be who they were. When I was in high school, when I was in college, it wasn't it wasn't as accepting and open. And I'm glad to see that it is more now. We talk about pronouns now that my children had to teach me. I was what does that even mean? I'm an educated woman, but I didn't know. And, oh, okay. All right. So I hope people just do, I reach everything with love, and that's the best way to meet people. That's what I feel. Now, their last question we have is, did you read other books by Stephen Rowley? And do you have any thoughts on them? Stephen Rowley is a Gen X himself. So did you read anything else by him by any chance?
I did not. This was my first foray into his world. I know you were speaking about his Gunkel book. And I know a lot of people were recommending that to me, but no, this is my first foray.
Right. So I read Gunkel, and they're actually going to have Gunkel Part 2, I think, is coming out in a few months. And I think Gunkel's going to become a movie. The other one, when I was, talking about this podcast, I also wound up reading Lily and the Octopus, which was a best-selling book, I think from back in 2016. And that one's also about grief, also different grief of a pet, though. But it's, a gay man, and he has a dog, and it was beautifully written. I've read a few books by him, and everyone that I have read, I enjoy. It could be because I have similar, he's, like I said, Gen X. All right, so the last part, 5 quick thoughts about the book. So the first one, would you recommend the book to someone on the street?
My answer would be no, I would not.
Oh,
I think it's really, not because anything nefarious, but just because I don't think this is a book that appeals to everyone. I think in order for me to recommend it to someone, I would need to know a little bit more about them, especially what they're triggered by, because this book can be very triggering.
Okay. I say yes, but that's because I'm 50 and a Generation X. And I think you're more thoughtful and thinking like, what are people being triggered by? That's more of a millennial trait. I'm like, well, figure it out,
Yeah.
Maybe not such a good thing. But if you could give this book a different title, what would it be?
For me personally, I think something along the lines of Friends in Real Life, or something with friends, just real life.
Yeah, Friends. That's what and then I'm like, oh, you don't want it to be Friends, but that's exactly but real life is good. I like that. What emotions did you feel when reading this book?
I felt a lot of emotions. I will say I felt happy, sad, anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Big ones right there.
All right. When I think of the book, when I think back before I reread it, or even when I reread it, I go to humor. Like, I feel like there's a lot of humor in it. One of my favorite is the skydiving scene, I just think there's a lot of humor in the book. But yes, there's a lot of things you feel, like you said, I didn't feel any anxiety, and I have anxiety, but I didn't feel anxious about it, but I definitely happy and sad. But I felt my overall was I thought it was a light book. So that's interesting, our 2 takes on it. We did touch on this, but what format did you consume the book in? Print, digital, audio? Did you think it would be different if you read it a different way? I don't know if we want to re-say that.
Real quick, I read it in audio, like I said. I think it would have been better to read it traditionally.
Okay, and I also read in audio, but I think I would have probably gotten the same feelings either way. If you could pick a theme song for the book, what would it be?
I had fun with this one, but it sounds like I didn't put any thought into this at all. I would definitely play Staying Alive, because I thought that would go with the whole fun vibe. But I don't know that there's not really deep thought that goes with that one.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I kept going to the Friends theme song, and I'm like, no, that can't be that, But I think with my 80s, because I think of they were grown up in the 80s. Then I went to Take On Me by a-ha. Even though it has nothing to do with the storyline, I just went to the 80s part of it. Do you have any other last comments about the book?
I loved the idea of this book, starting a pact and vowing to celebrate people while they're still alive, especially after earth-shattering, life-changing moments, was a really good premise. That was a really good hook for me to start the book. I loved that whole premise.
I think that's true, celebrate while you're alive. Don't wait till the end, till there's no more life. And that's it. Thank you very much, Lexi. I enjoyed chatting with you about this book.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to visit the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events. All the titles mentioned in today's episode can be found throughout the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.